What if the richest man in the city was also the loneliest? Tired of smiles that were bought, handshakes that were hollow, he made a choice no one saw coming: to disappear into the crowd and find out if love could exist without money. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Henry Whitmore was the kind of man everyone knew by name: wealthy, successful, powerful. From the top floor of the glass tower he built, he stood at the peak of everything he had ever worked for, looking down at the restless city below. Contracts were signed in his name. Handshakes sealed deals. Compliments always came wrapped in calculation. But no one truly saw Henry Whitmore. They only saw the fortune. Every afternoon, though, through that same towering window, something always caught his eye. There at the crowded intersection, beneath the blinking traffic lights and the rush of impatient drivers, stood a young woman, small, slender, brown hair tied back beneath the glare of the sun, a basket of candy tucked beneath her arm. She wasn't begging. She wasn't desperate. She simply stood there, offering each passerby a soft, genuine smile. Her name was Lillian. Henry had never spoken to her. He only watched, from above, from a world where no one could touch him. But day by day, the same question kept stirring inside him. If she knew who I really am, would she still smile at me that way? Henry understood too well the power of money. He knew how easily wealth could blind people, how quickly it turned kindness into obligation. But Lillian, she seemed different. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the city lights began to glow, Henry stood before his closet. Rows of tailored suits, polished shoes perfectly lined. Yet this time, his hand did not reach for the familiar. Instead, he pulled out an old jacket, its cuffs worn thin, paired with faded jeans and a knit cap long forgotten in the back of the shelf. The man in the mirror no longer looked like the millionaire everyone respected. For the first time in years, he looked like himself. "If I truly want to know her heart," he whispered, "then I have to leave my fortune behind." It was a choice many would call reckless, but Henry knew there was no other way. That night, beneath the hum of the city's neon lights, Henry Whitmore, the businessman, the millionaire, disappeared. And in his place stood a man with nothing but the truth, hoping to be seen, at last, for who he really was. There's something honest about a park bench. No walls, no stage, just two people, sharing the same worn seat beneath the shade of swaying trees. For a moment, the world slows down. It was here, on a quiet afternoon, beneath the soft rustle of leaves, that Henry first spoke to her. His heart pounded harder than he wanted to admit. Strange, he thought. A man who had faced ruthless investors without blinking, now struggling for words in front of a young woman with a basket of candy and a smile far too gentle for this city. "Good afternoon," he managed, tipping his head, forcing calm into his voice. Lillian turned, eyes soft, smile easy, not polite, not distant, but real. "Good afternoon," she replied, then asked simply, "Hard day?" No pity, no suspicion, just kindness, the kind that waits for an honest answer. Henry nodded, offering a careful smile. "Yeah, a little." She didn't press. She just sat down at the other end of the bench, set her basket beside her, and began sharing little stories about the woman in the blue sedan who always bought 3 caramels, the boy who saved up $1 to buy a peppermint for his mom. Small moments, the kind most people overlook, but Lillian held them like they mattered. And somehow, they did. Henry listened, quiet, present, asking just enough to keep her talking, and somewhere beneath the surface, something stirred. Hope. Small, careful, but real. The next day he came back. Not out of obligation. Not because he planned to, but because he wanted to. And there she was again. Same bench, same soft smile, as if the space had been waiting. "Good afternoon," he greeted. She smiled back. "Good afternoon. Better day today?" Their conversation stayed simple. The breeze, the candy that sold best when the sun was out, the dogs that chased pigeons near the fountain. Easy things, honest things. Day by day, a rhythm formed. Two strangers sharing nothing, and yet sharing enough. But beneath Henry's soft smiles, the weight of his lie grew heavier. Because every word he spoke, every question he asked, was wrapped in the falsehood of who he pretended to be. She believed he was just another face in the crowd, a man with worn clothes and little more to offer than conversation. And he let her believe it. Each night, back in the silence of his penthouse, the question haunted him. If she knew who I really was, would she still talk to me this way? Still, every day, he returned. Drawn not by guilt, not by curiosity, but by the quiet grace of a woman who, for a few minutes each afternoon, made the world feel honest again. Some smiles come easy, polished, practiced, worn like jewelry. But then, there are smiles like hers. Lillian's smile carried a softness the city hadn't touched. But Henry had lived long enough to know, even the brightest smiles can hide the deepest wounds. Weeks passed quietly. Same bench, same gentle conversations. And with every story, every easy laugh, Henry found himself wanting to know more. Not about candy sales. Not the weather. About her. Where did she go when the basket emptied? Who was waiting for her when the sun went down? Because beneath that warmth, there was something else. A weight in her eyes. A story she never told. And not knowing, that began to gnaw at him. One evening, as the last light of day faded into the dull orange glow of the street lamps, Henry made a choice. Curiosity disguised as concern. He followed her. Quiet, careful, always at a distance. Lillian walked with steady purpose, away from the polished city center, past coffee shops and storefronts, into streets where paint peeled from the walls and sidewalks cracked beneath the years. She didn't look back. Finally, she stopped. A small house, sagging beneath the weight of too many hard seasons, porch light flickering, curtains thin, crooked. From the shadows, Henry watched as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then soft light filled the room. Henry moved closer, staying hidden beneath the cover of dusk. Through the gap in the worn curtain, he saw her. The room was small, sparse, but clean, cared for. On the bed lay an older woman, frail, sunken deep into the mattress by illness. Lillian moved beside her, tender, patient. Medicine offered carefully. A blanket tucked gently beneath trembling arms, her hand resting on the woman's forehead as she whispered words too soft for Henry to hear. But he didn't need the words. The kindness in her touch said everything. This was the strength behind her smile, the burden she carried alone. Henry felt something tighten in his chest, admiration and guilt. While he had sat beside her, wondering what she was hiding, she had been carrying this. But just as he turned to slip back into the shadows, something stopped him cold. Lillian crossed the room, knelt by a small wooden table, reached beneath it. From the darkness beneath the table, she pulled out a worn canvas bag. She opened it carefully. Inside, stacks of cash, thick bundles of bills, counted with steady hands, tucked neatly into place. Too much money. Far too much for someone selling candy on the streets. Henry's breath caught. He watched as she counted each bill, not like someone surprised, but like someone who had done it many times before. When she finished, she sealed the bag, tucked it away again, and sat quietly in the dim light. Henry stepped back into the dark, his thoughts spinning. Where had that money come from? How could someone so kind, so gentle, hold a secret like this? The woman he had admired, the honesty he believed in, now stood beneath a cloud of doubt he couldn't shake. And as he walked away into the night, one question echoed louder than the rest. Was everything I believed about her just an illusion? The truth, as it often does, revealed itself quietly, but it refused to leave Henry alone. All day, the image of that worn canvas bag, the neat stacks of cash, counted so carefully by Lillian's steady hands, clung to his thoughts like smoke. It didn't fit. It didn't make sense. And Henry Whitmore was not a man who let questions go unanswered. So when dusk fell again, casting long shadows through the streets, he followed her. From a distance, careful, but determined. This time she didn't head home. Her steps moved quicker now, cutting down side streets where the city's shine gave way to its shadows, past shuttered storefronts and alleys slick with last night's rain, into the places where people stopped looking. And then she stopped. A low building sagged between taller ones, its neon sign buzzing faintly above the door. Bar, the red letters flickering like they might give out at any moment. The place smelled like trouble. Henry stayed outside, hidden near a cracked window. But through the gap where the glass pane hung loose, he could see her. Lillian. Behind the counter, clearing empty glasses, wiping down tables. No smile now, just quiet focus, dignity wrapped tight around her like armor. The men at the bar barely noticed her as a person. They talked over her, at her. One leaned in too close, tossing a crude remark her way. Another laughed loud, shoving his friend's shoulder as if she weren't standing right there. But she heard. Of course, she heard. She stood her ground, head high, hands steady, her face unreadable, but Henry could see the tightness in her jaw, the weight in the way she held herself, the kind of strength that comes not from pride, but from survival. This was where the money came from, not from candy sales, not from kindness, but from long nights spent here, under the weight of crude eyes and unwanted words. She didn't belong in a place like this, but here she was, not for herself, but for someone she loved, to buy time, to buy care, to keep her mother alive. Henry's fists clenched at his sides. Anger surged through him, not at her, but at the world. A world where a woman like Lillian, so full of grace, should have to endure this just to survive. How could someone carry so much and still be so kind? He watched as one of the men leaned in again, closer than necessary, his voice low. Henry couldn't hear the words, but he could see the way Lillian stiffened, the way she stepped back, holding her space without inviting a fight. She was used to this, used to walking the line between holding her dignity and not sparking the wrong kind of attention. And standing there, watching, Henry felt something inside him crack. Rage, yes, but deeper than that. Sorrow. A sorrow so sharp it stole his breath. The candy seller with the gentle smile, the daughter fighting for her mother, the woman standing alone beneath the weight of two lives, hers, and the one she was trying to save. As Henry turned away from the window and disappeared back into the night, the question that had haunted him from the start now pressed harder on his chest. How much more was she carrying that no one else could see? There's a certain helplessness that comes with knowing too much, standing at the edge of someone's pain, close enough to feel it, but too distant to be allowed in. Henry had always been a man of action, a problem solver, a man who could sign a paper, move a number, and make things happen. But this this was different. Night after night, the image of Lillian behind that bar stayed with him. Not the bright-eyed young woman he met each afternoon, but the one stripped of smiles, standing too close to danger, fending off the world with nothing more than dignity and silence. It haunted him. And yet he knew, with painful certainty, that if he showed up at that door offering help, offering money, it would only insult the very thing he admired most about her. Because Lillian was proud. Not the kind of pride that boasts, but the quiet kind. The kind that holds its head high even when the ground beneath is crumbling. She wouldn't take charity, not from a stranger, and certainly not from a beggar. So Henry did the only thing he could. He stayed in the shadows. He called on the influence he still held, not as the man sitting on that park bench each afternoon, but as the man behind the curtain, the one whose name carried weight where it mattered. No direct contact, no fingerprints, just quiet instructions, passed through the right hands. At the bar where Lillian worked, changes began to take shape. Subtle, deliberate. Her shifts were shortened, her hours more humane. The worst of the late-night duties quietly reassigned. Security tightened. A pair of bouncers now kept closer watch on the men who had once felt too free with their words and their hands. And without fanfare, without explanation, her pay increased. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to ease the burden. Lillian noticed, of course. She wasn't naive, but she asked no questions. Because sometimes, when life hands you a small mercy, you learn not to question where it comes from. You just hold on to it. Henry, watching from the distance he'd chosen, felt the smallest flicker of relief. But it was quickly swallowed by doubt. Is this enough? Or am I only trying to quiet my own guilt? The question gnawed at him. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't about charity. It wasn't about generosity. It was about something far more complicated. The need to do something when doing nothing would be unbearable. But even as he watched her, safer now, a little less burdened, Henry couldn't escape the ache in his chest. This small kindness. It didn't erase the lie he still carried between them. It couldn't. And as much as he wanted to believe he was helping, some part of him wondered if he was only buying himself time. Time to figure out what kind of man he really was beneath the mask he wore. There are lies that are spoken. And then there are lies that live in silence, growing heavier with every moment they remain unspoken. Henry knew this weight all too well. Day after day, he sat beside her on that familiar park bench, listening, laughing when she laughed, watching her eyes light up when she spoke of the small joys of her day. All while the truth sat lodged in his chest like a stone. Each smile she gave him, each easy trust she offered, built on sand. And Henry, for all his power, could feel the ground shifting beneath him. It couldn't go on. The lie had grown too large, too loud. It followed him home at night. It echoed in every word he spoke to her. And with each passing day, the risk of losing her felt smaller than the shame of keeping the secret. So, on a late afternoon, thick with the golden haze of sunset, Henry sat waiting at the bench where it had all begun. His hands clenched, his breath shallow. The city moved around him, unaware, unbothered, but inside him, a war raged. Then she arrived, Lillian, with that same quiet grace. The candy basket looped over her arm, the familiar softness in her smile as she approached. "Hey there," she greeted, sliding onto the bench beside him. "You look serious today." Henry swallowed hard, the words catching at the back of his throat. "Lillian," his voice cracked, then steadied. "There's something I need to tell you." Her smile wavered, the first crack of unease slipping into her eyes. She turned to face him fully, her hands resting lightly on her lap. "What is it?" Henry looked down at his hands, then up at her. "And there was nowhere left to hide. I'm not who you think I am," he said quietly. "My name is Henry Whitmore. I own the company in that tall building across the street. I'm not poor. I never was." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't settle. It sharpens. Lillian blinked once. Slowly, her breath caught halfway to her lips. Then her expression hardened, eyes wide, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. "What?" Her voice barely more than a whisper. "You lied to me?" The words landed heavy between them, leaving no room to breathe. "All this time," she continued, her voice rising, shaking now, "you sat here, beside me, and none of it was true?" "No," Henry pleaded, leaning forward, hands outstretched. "No, Lillian, please, listen." But she was already standing, stepping back as if distance could dull the betrayal. "Was I just an experiment to you?" Her voice cracked. "A test? Some little project to prove how good the poor candy girl could be?" The hurt in her eyes cut sharper than any accusation. Henry's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of her words. He shook his head, his voice raw, stripped of all defense. "No, God, no, I needed to know if your kindness was real. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who only see my money, not me. I wanted to know you, without that in the way." But his words, sincere as they were, fell into the space between them like stones sinking in water. Lillian's hands trembled as she wiped at the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. But she didn't look away. "And what about me, Henry?" she shot back, her voice steadier now, colder. "You wanted to know the real me, but you never gave me the chance to know the real you." The accusation hit its mark. Dead center. He had never considered what it must feel like from her side. The insult of being tested like a subject in a game she didn't agree to play. Henry tried to speak again, but the words wouldn't come. The trust between them, so carefully built, so delicately held, shattered in the space of a breath. Lillian stepped back once more, shaking her head slowly. "I thought you were different," she whispered. And with that, she turned away, walking down the path they had walked so many times together, now alone. Henry didn't follow. He couldn't, because there are some things that once broken are not so easily repaired. There are moments in life when words lose their weight, when apologies, no matter how sincere, feel too small against the damage they've done. Henry understood this now. Days had passed since that conversation in the park, if one could even call it that. More like the collapse of something fragile, something he'd held too tightly, too selfishly. Lillian's words echoed in his mind, relentless. "You wanted to know the real me, but you never gave me the chance to know the real you." There was no defense against that truth, no speech he could prepare, no plea that would sound anything but hollow. But there was something he could do. Because the pain in Lillian's eyes, as sharp as the betrayal, hadn't just come from his lie. Beneath her anger, beneath the heartbreak, Henry had seen the deeper weight she carried, the burden of a daughter holding the line between hope and despair, fighting for a life that wasn't her own, for a mother too sick to fight for herself. Henry could not undo the lie, but he could ease the burden. And so, quietly, with the precision of a man used to getting things done, he began to move. No grand gestures, no phone calls to Lillian, no offers she would be too proud to accept. Instead, he spoke with doctors. Quiet conversations behind closed doors, arrangements made with care, names withheld, anonymity insisted upon. The diagnosis was as grim as he'd feared. Lillian's mother didn't have time on her side. Surgery was not a choice, it was a necessity. Henry paid the costs in full, covered every detail, The operation, the aftercare, the medications, swore the hospital to silence. No notes, no signatures, no trail leading back to him. It's not about making her forgive me, he told himself one night, standing alone at the window of his high-rise apartment, staring out at the sleeping city below. It's not about winning her back. It's about doing what's right. And so he watched from afar, watched as the surgery took place, watched as Lillian's mother was moved to recovery, watched as, day by day, hope began to creep back into the corners of Lillian's life, though she never knew where the help had come from. Henry never stepped foot inside the hospital, never allowed himself close enough to see her face. This wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about being thanked. It was about honoring the truth of what he'd seen in her, that quiet courage, that relentless grace. And somewhere, deep inside, Henry understood. This was the first honest thing he'd done for her. Not as the millionaire, not as the man in disguise, but simply as a human being who had, finally, learned the weight of his own heart. The days drifted by, slow and quiet. Outside, the city hummed as always, impatient, indifferent. But inside the small house where Lillian lived, time moved differently. Softer, tender. Marked not by clocks, but by breaths, by heartbeats, by the steady rise and fall of her mother's chest as the woman slowly, carefully began to heal. It had been weeks since the surgery. Weeks since the night Henry disappeared from her life, leaving behind nothing but the sharp ache of betrayal. And yet, there it was. The miracle. The operation her mother so desperately needed. Done. The bills, impossible as they had seemed, paid. No explanations. No names. But Lillian was not naive. She knew life well enough to recognize the shape of unseen hands. She had not asked, had not begged. But somewhere deep inside, she understood. She knew whose hands had steadied the ground beneath her without asking for thanks. And that knowing unsettled her. Because anger, as fierce as it had been, could not hold its shape in the face of such quiet grace. It softened. Slowly, unwillingly at first, but inevitably. The nights grew longer, the silence around her heavier. And as she sat by her mother's bedside, watching recovery inch its way into their lives, the walls she had built inside herself began to crack. Until one morning, with the first light of dawn slipping across the kitchen floor, she picked up her phone and typed a message. Just a few words. "Can we meet?" One last time, she sent it, and waited. When the reply came, simple and careful, "Yes, the park, same place." Her heart clenched, unsure whether it was relief or fear that held it so tight. The park looked just as it always had, the same bench beneath the same wide-armed tree, its leaves whispering softly in the breeze. Henry was already there, sitting with his hands folded loosely in his lap, his gaze fixed on the ground, as though the earth itself might offer the forgiveness he could not ask for. When Lillian approached, he looked up slowly. No smile, no defense, only the quiet, tired eyes of a man who knew he deserved nothing, but still hoped. She stood for a moment, watching him, measuring. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I know what you did for my mother." Henry nodded once, eyes down again, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't for forgiveness. I didn't do it to make things right between us. I did it because it was right." Lillian's gaze didn't soften, not yet. Her arms crossed loosely over her chest, a shield she hadn't yet lowered. "I was angry, Henry," she said. "I still am." The words hung there, honest. She wasn't here to pretend. But then, a pause. A breath. "But I also see—" She swallowed hard, searching for the right words, choosing them carefully, that your heart was in the right place. Her eyes lifted to meet his, direct, unflinching. I don't forget easily, Henry. Trust, it doesn't come back just because someone wants it to. She stepped a little closer. But I believe in second chances. The air between them shifted, not lighter, not yet, but something had moved. No more lies, she continued. No more games. If we try again... She held his gaze, steady, strong. We start from the truth. Henry exhaled, long and slow, his hands unclenched where they had gripped his knees too tightly. He nodded once, the smallest movement, but filled with more gratitude than words could carry. No promises were made that day, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet understanding, shared beneath the same tree where they had first begun, now standing on the fragile edge of something new. Because forgiveness, Lillian knew, was not a gift handed over lightly. It was a path, and they were only just beginning to take the first step. Forgiveness was not their ending. It was their beginning. Henry and Lillian didn't rush back into what was broken. They moved slowly, small steps, honest conversations, the kind of trust rebuilt day by day. One afternoon, as they shared coffee beneath the quiet buzz of the city, Henry asked, "If you could do anything, Lillian, what would it be?" She hesitated, tracing the rim of her cup. "I always dreamed of a small cafe. Nothing fancy, just a place where people feel welcome." She smiled softly, almost apologetically. Silly, isn't it? But Henry only shook his head. No, not silly at all. And so the dream began to take shape, not because Henry saved her, but because he stood beside her. They chose the space together, painted the walls, picked out chairs that invited conversation, not transactions. Lillian designed the menu. Henry tasted every coffee blend, laughing with her over the bitter ones. Piece by piece, they built something real, not a business, a home, a reflection of who they were becoming. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was steady, kind. One evening, standing together by the cafe window, Henry spoke quietly. "For the first time, I feel like someone truly sees me." Lillian turned to him, her smile gentle. "You've always been there, Henry. Maybe you just needed to see yourself. No grand speeches, no fireworks, just two hearts learning to heal." Together. By the time the cafe doors had opened and the smell of fresh coffee drifted out onto the street, something between Henry and Lillian had already begun to change. The space they had built together, the soft light, the welcoming chairs, the photographs on the walls, was not just a business. It was a reflection of who they had become. Two people learning to stand side by side, not above, not beneath, but together. And so, when Henry invited Lillian to dinner one quiet evening, there were no grand plans, no extravagant surprises. Just a simple meal, and the city lights flickering beneath a starlit sky. The balcony where they sat was small, intimate. A table set for two, tucked away from the noise of the streets below. Overhead, the glow of string lights moved gently in the night breeze. They talked the way they always had, about little things, about the cafe, about her mother's recovery, about the regular customers who had already started to feel like friends. But beneath Henry's calm smile, his heart was full. When the moment felt right, not because of the setting, but because of the honesty between them, he rose quietly from his chair. No speech prepared, no polished words, just the truth. He lowered himself to one knee, his gaze steady on hers. "Lillian, you didn't fall in love with my money, and that's why I fell in love with you." She stared at him, eyes wide, her breath caught somewhere between surprise and understanding. "You've seen me," he continued, "the parts of me no one else ever cared to look at. and I've seen you, your strength, your grace, your kindness." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Inside, a simple ring, delicate, unassuming, honest. "Will you marry me?" For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Lillian's eyes glistened, tears gathering not from sorrow this time, but from something softer, something steady. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling but sure. "As long as we always stay honest and stay kind?" Henry nodded, smiling through the blur of his own tears. There were no fireworks, no applause, only the quiet certainty of two hearts choosing one another, not for show, not for rescue, but for love. Their wedding was not the kind of story that fills magazines. There were no crystal chandeliers, no towering flower arrangements, no headlines. Instead, it was the kind of day that felt right, simple, true. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the cafe, the place where their shared dream had grown roots. String lights hung between the trees, swaying softly as the afternoon breeze moved through. Friends gathered, neighbors who had become family, the familiar faces who had shared in their journey without ever asking for more than a warm smile and a good cup of coffee. And there, seated near the front, was Lillian's mother. Health returned to her cheeks, eyes bright with pride as she watched her daughter step forward. Lillian wore a dress as simple as the life she had built. Soft ivory, no embellishments, just grace. Henry, standing at the altar, wore no tie, only an open collar and a heart wide open. When they spoke their vows, there was no performance, no lines read from cards, no borrowed words. Only the promises they had come to believe in through the trials they had faced. "I promise to see you," Henry began, his voice steady, but his hands trembling slightly as he held hers. Not through the lens of status, not through pride, but through the truth of who you are. Lillian's eyes shone, her smile soft. "And I promise," she answered, "to stand beside you not because I need saving, but because I choose you, again and again." Their hands tightened together, sealing the words not with spectacle, but with sincerity. The applause that followed was gentle, honest, a reflection of the life they were building, nothing loud, nothing extravagant, just full of heart. No story truly ends with a wedding. Life continues, sometimes quiet, sometimes messy, always unfolding. For Henry and Lillian, the days that followed were not without their struggles. There were early mornings when the cafe felt too empty, bills that piled higher than they'd expected, plans that didn't always go as hoped. But there was also laughter, shared meals, hands held across the table after long, tired days. There were conversations where they disagreed, but listened, moments where the past crept back in. But forgiveness held the door open. They learned to lean on each other, not out of weakness, but out of trust. Lillian remained not just Henry's love, but his equal. The one who reminded him, daily, that love wasn't something you earn with money or gestures. It was something you build, with patience, with humility, with truth. And Henry, in turn, gave her space to dream, to lead, to be more than the girl at the intersection with the candy basket. Together they built a life not marked by perfection, but by the quiet, daily choice to keep showing up for one another. Their story stands as a quiet reminder. Real love isn't bought, it's built, brick by brick, day by day, not perfect, but real, and in the end, that was always enough. And what about you? How would you rate this story on a scale from 1 to 10? Leave your number and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd truly love to hear what you think. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss more meaningful stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.